Okay then, I call this meeting of the Academics Committee in order. Items for discussion, IReady Diagnostics 2 reading. Who would that be?
I'll start with that one.
Perfect.
So this really was something we discussed in our academic services retreat the Friday before we left for Christmas break. And Stacia brought some data for us to look at just so we could start the planning process for next year. And one thing I like our team to do is to question things. And so I've been kind of questioning if IReady is a successful tool. And we have some data from Mrs. Studer, and then we also have some data from Dr. Lau, so we're going to share that with you today. So I'm going to turn it to Stacia.
So the work of our curriculum advisors, right, has really been targeted work in the way of instructional practices. Like how do we move, really the emphasis has been on literacy data because we have implemented a new curriculum. And so now is the progress monitoring time. And so when I went to go pull that data, one of the big things, because as a leader you zoom in and you can get so zoomed in that you have to zoom out to see the big picture. And this was our opportunity as a team to really zoom out and see the big picture. The big picture really is, if you look at the last 4 years, as a district, we have, and Kendra will speak to the growth, but I'll speak to the projected proficiency. We've been kind of at a, I would call like, we've been stuck at 40% in projected proficiencies. So that means that in 2019 and 2020, we were at 43%. And then in 2020, 2021, we were at 41%. 21, 22, we were at 40%. And then this year at window 2, at the exact same time, we're at 41%. And so I brought this to the team to kind of help me think through at a big picture district lens, what do we need to do? Here is where we are as a district right now in big picture. And so does it need, how can we support that movement past that 40%? I will say my team, I want to give so much thanks to the curriculum advisors because we did hit a 96% completion rate for the IReady Diagnostic, which is great. And so we have viable, I feel good data. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. Lau. She'll go a little bit more in detail, particularly about that growth piece. But I did want to draw your attention to the last 4 years we have been sitting at about 40% in reading, where kids are at least at early on grade level or at mid or grade level.
So that's a perfect segue to some of the research nationwide of what we're seeing. So it's almost like a blessing and a curse when you look at the fact that before the pandemic and then through the pandemic, we held. Nationwide, the students have declined 5 points in reading. We didn't. Nationwide in math, students have declined 9 points. We didn't. So while the question is always what's our next, I think that is something that we can see through the lens of that data is some of that stability and trying to get through difficult challenges. So I did want to bring up this study that just has recently been done, and I'm sure you've all seen the NAEP studies. And then there's an additional study, and we're going to get into that through the lens of just IReady users and what kind of learning loss that we've seen through the pandemic and what does that mean about our district and the efficacy, for example, of Stacia's team and how that's helped us tremendously in a variety of things that have been done to help stabilize our students' learning. And I would also point out too that during the 2021 school year when we went ahead and took state assessments, we did improve in ELA that year, and then this year we improved in 3 of the 6 areas that were tested, grades 3 through 8, while the state declined in all grades in ELA. So again, it's a blessing and a curse. There's good things that have happened, but yet what's our next? And how do we move forward? So you do have something, a handout available to you. So I'm just going to point out and this isn't working, so I'm so glad that I got you a handout. Oh, it is working, yeah. So I'm going to skip, there's a lot of data here, and I will gladly show this to academic services tomorrow. I'm sure they're looking forward to it, but I'm just going to point out a few things. So one of the things that we continue to look at is, and you'll see this on the very far left, the national norm, winter 18-19, okay, before things hit, and the Missouri year to date. This would be the winter 22-23 for all IReady users in this state of Missouri, which is a pretty large population sample. And then you can compare us, our district, to that sample size. So we're pretty much right there. We have a few more that are in the 3 grade levels and below, and we track that very closely because that's going to be one of your telltale signs about some issues, either from the pandemic or from interventions not working, those kind of things. And then if you look, we've got about 33% 1 grade level below, and then we're pretty much neck and neck with the rest of the schools, a little bit higher in the green. So that was positive information. Any questions about that particular slide? All right, I'm going to move on to this slide here. And so this shows from fall to winter in key areas. And we're only focusing on ELA, as Stacia mentioned, because there's a new ELA curriculum. So we're really looking at some very specific domains so that we can better understand how our students are performing. And again, this is compared to national data. And so you can see from the color coding if we've increased more than the national or increased by exceeding 5 points, 5 percentage points, increased more than the national fall to winter between 0 and 5. So you can see in one of our areas that we have a lot of concern in is first grade. There's some positive metrics there that show good things, and also at our kindergarten level, and really throughout, you can see that those gains have been made just from a color code quick scan of it. So we were relatively felt decent about some of those, but we'll dig into that more, and that helps us better understand next steps and the discussions that we have in academic services. Then if you go on to the next slide, this is one of my favorite data analysis tools because it really shows us 2 things. One of the things is the students' proficiencies, but it shows us the growth they made from the beginning of the year testing to middle of the year testing. And that is probably your most sensitive way to look at instruction in the classroom. And so what you want to see is you want kids to be in those top 2 squares. Either we know we have some proficiencies that may not be advanced or proficient, that would be a higher proficiency. They might still be basic or below basic, but they're growing. They have a high growth rate. And the engine to change proficiency is growth. So, and you can see grade 2 and grade K are both high performance and high growth. So those were positive things. And then we have grade 8 is in low performance and low growth. So Stacia and I talked about that last night. We'll dig into more of that so we can better understand, what changes and things need to happen there. But you want, by mid-year, you want everybody somewhere in those 2 quadrants and above that 50th percentile. And so while grade 8 isn't quite there, it's, it's not far off, so hope we're going to be focusing on that and see what changes we can make there. If you look at the next slide, this goes to some of the things Stacia was saying, especially when you look at proficiencies. If we have kids coming to us in the St. Joe School District who are mid or above grade level on their first diagnostic, what we want to see in those blue squares is at least a 50% right now, because it's halfway through the year. So if we don't see that, then that we have to ask ourselves what's happening. So you can see from grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 that kids that come in on grade level are not showing any change. Okay? And so that's what we've identified, and we've identified this before, but we continue to see it a tier 1 instructional problem, because that's grade level mastery. So that's the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of what the instruction should be covering, is that grade level instruction. So if we're not seeing that, then students that are ready to learn, you can see we're not seeing any growth there. Now if you move down a slot, you're seeing a lot of growth. And then 1 grade level below, you're seeing good growth. And even the 2 grade levels below or 3 grade levels below, you're seeing that growth. So that's just something that we are continuing to focus on. And it's certainly part of, and Stacia will tell you, our professional development with Core Collaborative. Is very focused on those pieces, as is Stacia's team. The next slide that I have for you is this particular slide talks about growth in our internal assessment system, because that's really what IReady is. It's an assessment system, so we're not flying blind, so that we can tack from point A to point B as we go throughout the school year. What we're really looking for is how students are meeting their growth, because if they're not meeting their growth, they're not going to change their proficiency by the end of the year. So the lighter blue talks about typical growth. That's what's expected in an average school year. That is what we would tell folks, that's a non-negotiable. If kids are hanging around you, we should at least see this amount of growth. So all of that, what you see in the light blue, it should be at least 50% right now. And so what that means to us is that half those percentages have met half their typical growth. So we're midway through the year, and quite frankly, we take it a little early. And we had trouble getting it taken at the beginning of the year due to some device issues. So this is pretty good growth, because this is a pretty skinny window. I mean, so, and then with the darker blue, that's stretch growth. So that's the growth that we've been focusing on a lot during the pandemic, because that's the kind of growth we want to see to make up for learning loss and gain on those proficiencies. For those kids that are 2 grade levels below or 3 grade levels below, they've got to hit their stretch growth, because when the teacher passes the baton to the next teacher, they're on the path to proficiency. And so that's what we're trying to do, is get those kids in. This is what people talk about at our job embedded tables, is what is Johnny or Susie's or whomever's stretch growth, and are we meeting it? And so if you can see here, it's very rare to even get 25% stretch growth by the end of the year. So this was a strong metric for us, because we're on pace in a lot of those areas to meet 100% stretch growth for some of those grade levels. So when Stacia and I looked at that last night, we felt like that was a strong metric, but we're going to continue to focus in on that, especially in the middle grades where we need to see that increase. So those were good, but there's always the good with some concern. And then lastly, this just goes into what we call IReady usage. It's for ELA, we ask people to be on IReady anywhere between 25 and 20 minutes, 30 minutes a week. That's not a day, that's a week. And so you can see that the usage is tacking right where it should be, but it tails off in the 7th and 8th. And you can tell from the data that was those grade levels were a little bit lower than some of the rest of the grade levels. What IReady does basically is it gives an adaptive test that figures out what gaps kids have, and then they can spend some time backfilling some of those gaps, not an inordinate amount of time, but it has to be used in conjunction with the teacher, because the teacher is the professional in the room that went to school for 4 years, and she or he needs to be helping make sure that that's an appropriate path. And then, in addition to that, assigning specific lessons based on what they're seeing in the classroom. So they shouldn't be just on autopilot. And when we see folks on autopilot that are just spinning their wheels on this, we shut it off, because it's a proxy for instruction. So that is that piece of the, and that was just ELA. So when we have our next M6 committee meeting, we'll have the next iteration of the balanced scorecard, and we can talk about math at that point too. But like I said, we did go up in almost every grade level in math on the statewide test, and so that was a good showing for last year, and so we're hoping to continue that trend. Any questions on that? Okay. Well, then I'm going to roll right into attendance. And so I have a couple things that I handed out about attendance. Well, yeah, about 3. So attendance, what you basically have is you have a sheet that's stapled together that says 12/16/2022, and then you have one that's stapled together that says 12/16/2021. Oh no, is it? Well, doggone it. Okay. So anyway, that's why you have handouts. So what I wanted to do is point out just a couple things. So for our attendance in the month of December, we did decline a little bit from November. I would say though, in November we declined 1.4 attendance points. And this time in December, we declined not even a point. So our decline was almost half that decline that we saw in November. We had a lot of illness in November. So while we still declined a little bit, it was less. And so that, while I didn't want to see a decline at all, I was encouraged that we weren't on some steep slope continuing down. So we, for all intents and purposes, held steady. The decline in November was heavy duty in grades K through 4, and almost 3 points. And that's, usually we don't see that. And so we know that it really hit our elementary schools. And so in December, the average was less than a point in those grades. So those kids have rallied, whether it was we heard a lot from the attendance interventionists. If you look at the data, a lot of it was illness. And then we still, our middle schools and our high schools kind of declined more so than they did in November. In November, our middle schools and high schools kind of buffered what was happening at the elementary. So that's just a snapshot of December. But what I wanted to point out is that we also need to think through the lens of nationwide, we are seeing a massive chronic absenteeism problem. So if you ask and look at the research, we're having a hard time reestablishing good attendance behavior. And so when we look back to where we were this time last year, right now we're about 5% points higher than we were this time last year. And just to put a deeper lens on this, for example, in grades 3, we are almost 9 percentage points higher right now than we were last December. So that's a big time for kids to be in school. That's huge. For our second graders, they're up 6 points from over this time last year. Our biggest increase was actually in 6th grade. So we're almost 11% higher this time right now, in December than we were last year in December. So all of that's very encouraging when you look at the elementary minus kindergarten. And so we're almost returning back to that normal shape that we usually see, where we see kindergarten and 12th grade being the worst in terms of attendance. Because during the pandemic, it was pretty much 7th grade and then 9th grade would spike. And this was nationwide, and it was also our trend. But the things that I wish I was seeing that I'm not seeing, even our 7th and 8th grade have rallied. Our 8th graders are attending more, our 7th graders are attending more. Now they're still in the 70s, so I am not doing a happy dance or anything, but it's improved. But our 9th, our 10th, and our 11th and 12th graders, they're not moving the needle as much as the rest of the population. In fact, our 11th graders are attending less right now than they were this time last year. And our 12th graders have improved by about 2 points. Our 9th graders are about 3 points up, and our 10th graders are about 4 points up. But when I see a grade level attending less now than they did when we were still kind of in the fog of the still dealing with a lot from the pandemic, which, I mean, we still are, but my whole point is it was worse then. So that's a concern. So we're going to be talking through that. We've already talked about making some plans today. So we'll be looking at that. Another piece that we look at is every building has an attendance plan. And so we call it a Plan, Do, Study, Act. And so they made those plans last spring. And so they're working those plans. But to work a plan, you have to spend the plan. So they, the finance office gave them roughly about $8 a student. And so that it was equitable. And so what I've seen in that data that Katie provided for me is we've got about 5 buildings that have spent 50% of their plan. So, and the district has spent over 50% of its plan. But, so we're gonna go back out and talk to folks about, if you're gonna work the plan, you gotta spend the plan. So that's something else that we're gonna be looking at. If you look at the attendance codes, it's still health and it's still unverified absences. And so our attendance interventionists are, and this is where this handout comes in. We have attendance interventionists for every building except, I believe it's Ellison and
It's just Oak Grove.
it's just Oak Grove. And so we're still trying to find an attendance interventionist there. I would point out, for example, Benton High School's attendance is doing really well. They're 10 points higher than they were this time last year. And so we have, she couldn't be here today, but Bethany Hernandez-Rice is her name. She's their attendance interventionist, and Lara will tell you, she works so hard. And they all work so hard, but we're seeing the impact. Central didn't have one, so we're hoping to see that impact. And so they are making a lot of phone calls, and they are going on a lot of home visits. So through the lens of this training that they received, and Eileen was actually in that training with us, and this is from Dr. Shade Harris. You may remember we Zoomed with her one day, and she's from Richmond Public Schools. And so she came in and trained them on how to do a family visit where you just build a relationship and then you go back and you share information. And one of the questions you ask them is, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? And so and I would show this to you, but I'm not able to at the moment. But I'll just turn my computer around. Everything that these attendance interventionists do, they log. And then they give a commentary. So they've been going out and literally having dinner with families, bringing pizza, and talking about attendance. This one says, I'm trying to find one of them that I had read. Liam has not missed any more days of school and his ADA is above 90% now. I emailed his dad, Jesse, to thank him again for taking time out of the day to speak to me last month and praised Liam and his sister Tommy's attendance for this year. And then they also, like I said, we provided dinner, pizza for the family for meeting attendance goals. Mom cried and then thanked her greatly. So that's the things that they're going out and doing, and talking with families. Now, it's not all that rosy. There are some things that aren't quite as rosy, but they are trying to connect with families, because all of the research points to for attendance is about engaging with the families. Several of our families may have had negative school experiences, so or they have lots of different barriers to getting their kids to school. Tomorrow we're meeting with Mosaic, and they're helping us with a website that connects our attendance interventionists with all of our community resources. Ashley will tell you, we went to the United Way last month, and our attendance interventionists were there to get connected to resources. And then we're also going to, I'm taking them to another organization on the following Wednesday. I meet with them every Wednesday. So we're going to go out and connect them with more folks in the community, because they're learning things about bus passes and healthcare and all kinds of things that they can help their families connect to resources. So that's been good. So while we're not where we want to be, we've seen it, we're improved over where we were last December, especially in the early grades. And so we're going to continue to work the plan and change up and continue to work the plan throughout this year to try to improve that attendance. So, and I think that's all I'm going to talk about today. Any questions you may have?
So I know you said one of the goals for the attendance interventionist is to outreach to the families and build that connection. How do they do that when they have a family that does not speak English as a first language?
Yeah, so they can take an interpreter with them.
Okay.
And so we've talked about that and making sure that if that need were to arise, or even a sign language interpreter, those kind of things, so that they connect with the families.
Yeah. And do you see a lot of cases where the families that don't speak English as a first language are getting those services from the interventionist, or are most of them English speaking? They really haven't mentioned it as a major hurdle. There's usually someone there in the family that can help support the conversation. But if there's not, they have reached out to get help with those families.
Question. If there's a family and they're not open to engagement, what happens then?
Well, I mean, they continue to try to engage with them from a positive perspective, even if it's calling them later on just to tell them something positive about, their child. In some instances, though, I mean, you can look at our data, then, we have to also follow through on accountability measures. Like if a student just continues not to come to school, we have to hotline. We do those things because those are safety and security issues for kids. So it's, like I said, it's not always perfect. You're gonna have families, Dr. Harris will tell you, you're gonna have families that don't want to engage. But they continue to try to reach out to those families. The biggest thing with this model is they call them liaisons in Richmond, Virginia, but the biggest thing is to have that attendance interventionist start to get street cred with the school family and community that they own. Because then if that family is not really willing to engage and they see, these people aren't that bad, like this ends up being a good thing. So, but it just takes time to build that. She's going to come back and work with us again in January. And so continue to help them build that skill set and kind of that street cred with their community and neighborhood.
Excuse me. I think one of the things that Dr. Harris talked about is everybody can't go everywhere. And so sometimes you might need to take somebody with you that has that credibility. And I don't think that that was something that was thought about before she brought that up in the training. And so grab somebody who might have credibility to go with you and support. And I think that's critical in some of those situations.
We did a lot of role playing.
Mhm.
I mean, we had to be the family, and then we had to be the attendance interventionist, and back and forth, because it takes learning on how to not be, come in with your finger wagging and, why aren't you at school and all that, and just to build those relationships.
It's just investing in that community.
Mm-hmm. That's what it
spending
is.
Time and.
It just is gonna take time.
One piece from an attendance standpoint that I would touch base on too is that we do have a new prosecutor who started yesterday. And so Ashley and I have sit down with her, and I think we'll get some help from the prosecutor's office on letters, that'll not tell people that they're going to go to jail if their kids don't go to school, but just some accountability behind it, and hopefully send a message. So we're working on that too.
Perfect, thank you.
Because that's where, you look at kindergarten, I mean, it's not the kid's fault.
No, absolutely. And in the past, we've had that, and it helps a lot, sometimes just to have a letter that, not from us.
Now, what would that, would it be kind of a warning more so?
Well, right now, we send one, they would have to explain after so many days, right, 8 or 4 or 2
Yes,
or
it's
something.
more impactful at the high school level because then they're looking at not getting credit. But honestly, it's just, this is where your kid's at with attendance. If you have good attendance, it shows this, that, and the other. The one from the prosecuting attorney's office would be more quoting the legal statute that parents are required to legally have their kids in school. And so that would just be more an extra layer of accountability and support.
And really, it was in place, I think Kendra would know this, when Dwight Scroggins was the prosecutor, he gave us the plan. He gave us about a 4-page document and so we provided that to Michelle, the new prosecutor, and hopefully she'll work with us.
Okay. And is it kind of like a partnership between?
Yeah. Yeah.
the district?
I remember my oldest, she was like in kindergarten, it was like early ages, and I got a detention. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not even the student, only she was always late, and it was my fault because, and so I got a detention. And after like a couple of those, I'm like, okay, I need a new game plan because I'm tired of sitting. And my daughter was able to go in the library, and no, I was in the classroom with the teacher. And all these years, it's just stuck into my mind. I did the crime and then I had to do the time, so.
Now, was that implemented by the school?
I thought it was today.
It was at the school. She went to Pickett Elementary at the time. And I'm not gonna lie, it took me like 9 detentions, and then I was like, okay. It really did. Okay, but now,
Ashley did.
okay, but now I'm never late to anything now. I'm traumatized. Thank you for that. Okay, are there any more questions about attendance? Are we ready to move on to the behavioral interventionist? Is that you, Beth?
That is me. Okay, so I am just going to kind of give you an overview. I gave you a one-pager on where the behavior interventionists are and then kind of what they do. So we have 4 district-level behavior interventionists. We have one that is a social worker who provides kind of that trauma lens, does a lot of professional development, working with classrooms and buildings from that scope. We have one that primarily focuses at the elementary level, and then we have one who is primarily focusing at the middle and high school level. However, they do work in all buildings. And then we have one that is a board-certified behavior analysis. She's a BCBA, so she can conduct functional behavioral analysis. She works with our most significant students, our Tier 3 students, and in all the buildings throughout the district. We use Title I funds to fund the behavior interventions at the elementary school. So they're at Cardiff Park, Coleman, Edison, Hosea, Lindbergh, Mark Twain, and Parkway. And then at the middle school level, we use Title IV funds. And those are at Bodie, Ruby, Spring Garden, and Truman. Every middle school has a behavior interventionist. So primarily they facilitate, we use positive behavior intervention approach. That's kind of the framework we use. It is just a framework for behavior. So it's not a system, it's not a program. It's just building and teaching behavioral skills and then positively reinforcing those through a tiered system. So they facilitate that in the buildings. They provide professional development. They work with teachers on classroom instruction and tiered plans. They work with students on specific behavioral skill development. So they might pull a student out, teach them a skill, then help them generalize that skill to the classroom. They collaborate with all team members. So it's not, when you look at a kid that exhibits some behaviors, it's not just the classroom teacher and the behavior interventionist. A lot of times we need to rope in the social worker, the counselor, the building administrators. Sometimes there's auxiliary personnel, like if they have built a great relationship with the librarian or the music teacher, we build all of those people. So we collaborate. It's hard to find time for everybody to get together. So the behavior interventionist can build that team and collaborate with all of those stakeholders. And then they also help analyze data and make decisions so that we're not making decisions with our emotions, especially students that exhibit behaviors. It builds a lot of emotion in the adults as well. And so it's important that we always ground ourselves in what does the data telling us? What is significant? Where are we going? Where are our key times that we need to target? And what exactly is the function of that behavior? And what can we do to help curb that? I have them annually do a time on task to know exactly where they're spending their time and how we might need to shift their role or goals. I had them do it a little bit early because I knew people were going to be asking questions this year. I usually wait until about March. But they spent about 8% of their time so far with classroom practices. It's being in the classroom, observing students, working with teachers on basic Tier 1 behavior management, classroom management. They spend about 16% of their time on targeted Tier 1 plans. So these are students who, through just everyday instruction, are exhibiting chronic behaviors, maybe blurting out, maybe tapping pencils, maybe getting out of their seat, just chronic behavior problems. And so we'll build a targeted plan that might be more directed just for that student that the teacher implements within the classroom. They spend about 14% of their time on targeted Tier 2 plans. Those are plans that where the behavior is now starting to impact the instruction within that classroom. And so that student might need a break outside the classroom. They might need to visit the refocus room. They might need a specific skill taught by the behavior interventionist or the counselor that they need to generalize back into that classroom. And then 10% of their time is spent on targeted Tier 3 plans. Targeted Tier 3 are students who are exhibiting behaviors that are impeding the learning of themselves and probably those of their class members. Those plans are very intensive. They're typically written after we've done a functional behavioral analysis and we've determined what the function of the behavior is and then how we can directly target that behavior with very specific supports. Sometimes it's seeing the social worker, sometimes it's providing more adult assistance, sometimes it's providing some type of one-on-one interaction to teach skills that they're lacking. They spend about 12% writing these plans, tracking data, completing paperwork, and then 19% of their day is spent on responsive services. So that is responding to students who are in crisis, who are exhibiting behaviors in which have definitely impacted the classroom. The student needs to be removed from the classroom, or the student is not safe enough to be removed from the classroom and the other students are removed. That is the area that actually concerns me the most by this. 19, I mean, that's a lot of time that they're spending just responding. However, when you look at under plans, there's only 17 Tier 3 plans in the elementary building, which means that those Tier 3 students are probably needing responsive services more often. So it's not that we have a bunch of students who are exhibiting these types of behaviors. We have a few who are requiring a lot of attention. So plan-wise at the elementary, we have 44 targeted Tier 1 plans, 84 targeted Tier 2 plans, 17 targeted tier 3 plans, and then we have 19, they're called a BIP or a behavior intervention plan, and that's a plan that's written because the student has an IEP for behavior and it's written through the special education system. And then I just threw in some facts when I kind of went through and evaluated the behavior interventionists last year to determine kind of what our structure and what our changes needed to be made this year. I wanted to give you some positives because there have been a lot of really good things come out of the behavior interventionists. They do provide a lot of support. But they provided 65 professional development opportunities last year. They were working continuously in their buildings to build those positive behavior approaches to learning. Our goal is to become more proactive with behavior and less reactive. So if we're gonna reduce our responsive services, we have to put forth more effort in being proactive in what we're providing students and teachers. And then 10 out of 14 elementary schools, so an ODR is an office referral. Our data was actually trending down last year from 2018, 2019. I chose that year because that was the last full year of school we had. 1920, we ended in March because of COVID, so obviously our data is going to trend down. And then 2021, we did have a significant number of students in virtual school, and so they did not have office referrals because there wasn't an office to refer them to. And so again, our office referral data, it was hard to find true numbers to compare apples to apples. We're comparing a lot of apples to oranges right now. But so then last year was our first full year of school and our office referrals were trending down. So I feel like we have built a structure and a system. I think we've only had behavior interventions for the last 4, maybe 5 years. And so it's kind of been a learning curve of what their role is, what their job is, and how do we provide the right training and support for them to be the most effective use in our buildings.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I was looking at the plans on the elementary students. Are there particular schools who have a larger amount of plans over other schools?
I would have to dig into that more. I know our larger schools are gonna have more plans because there's more students, but as percentage of like plans per students, I don't know. Like percentage of plans in the buildings, I don't know, because I'll tell you,
Right.
our large schools have more plans, but there's also quite a few more students. So I can look that up and get back with you on that.
Thank you.
Are the parents notified of their kids being placed on the plan?
Yes, because they're part of that plan process. And so that is something that every school should be calling those parents and talking to them because we want to know what their reinforcers are, you know, what makes them tick, what makes them happy.
So it's up to the school to contact the parent?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there a toolkit like this?
There's not.
Okay, because this is really cool.
It is really cool.
Are we able to get one?
I mean, I can create one, yeah.
Sorry to make
No,
you
that's
go.
all right. That's not a big deal.
Thank you, I really like this. I mean, it's really, I mean, it answers a lot of my questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Are we missing anything, Sorry, is there anything you have?
I just wanted to let Reba know, I know she's the only community member I see, but we're gonna be restructuring the academics committee based on the vision forward plan. So if you're interested in joining, I think it's gonna be called, just a different name, or we're gonna add it to the academics committee. If you're interested in continuing your participation, just reach out to me via email, and then I'll get with Gabe and see if we can do that.
Sure.
And I just want to add that I'm interested in you continuing.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm interested in you continuing.
Oh, thank you. I am too. I have a passion.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Any other questions or comments? Dave, you have anything?
Nope.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned, thank you.
Thank you.